Financial Stories. I'm Kevin Tharp, elder law and estate planning attorney.
And I'm Gary Anderson, financial advisor, Anderson Advisors.
Gary, today is story time on truth and planning. Now, there's a lot of kids out there that's like, ooh, I love story time. There's a lot of adults that love story time. I know I do. Because I learned a lot, and we learn a lot through stories because they're examples that apply to some of the most important principles we learn in our lives. I know that I remember a lot in certain law school classes because the professor had a very good ability of taking the cases and turning them into stories, and then you realize later these are real life cases that went to the Supreme Court. And so I remember those now. When I remember certain principles of constitutional law, I remember those stories. So we're going to talk a little bit about stories, things that we've experienced over the years, you've experienced over the years as a financial advisor, and how that applies to our listeners and how that applies to us today.
Yeah, Kevin, that's a good point. As far as stories go, we tend to put ourselves into stories that someone else is telling as well. And I think today people are going to see bits and pieces of themselves in a lot of the stories that we tell. And that way, a lot of times you learn from other people's stories, things that have happened to them, and you learn how to maybe get help in some of these areas. The first story I would like to start out with would be a client that I had come into my office probably about 6 years ago, somewhere in there. And he was 82 years old at the time. Very, very smart guy. Had a huge amount of experience in the business world, had been a CEO of a couple of good big companies in a couple of different states over the years. And he really enjoyed being in front of a computer screen a lot, Even at that age, he was, he went way back with this, and this is the way he operated. Even before a lot of his contemporaries did at the time. But one thing he liked to do, in addition to being the CEO of these companies, he loved to invest himself. He loved to take his money and invest it the way he wanted to.
He turned it into his hobby.
Yeah, that was his hobby. He didn't build things. He didn't cut the grass. He didn't do anything like that. Somebody else did that for him. So this was his hobby. And I've got several clients now who are the same way. They do that. But one thing that he did understand, and he came in the office, I had no idea what he'd come for because he just scheduled an appointment and came in. He came in, and the first thing he said is, Gary, I love investing for myself. I've done well with it over the years. He kind of told me some of the things that he did, and it very fascinating. So he had made a lot of money in the markets over the years and had lost very little over time. Sometimes you see people who say, well, you always hear about the good side of things, but he was showing me the good and the bad. He had it all documented there, and sure enough, he had done well. But he came in and he said, Gary, I feel like I'm slipping. He said, I'm not as good at this as I was. He said, matter of fact, I'm not as good at several things. Just cognitively, he felt like things were going on and he couldn't keep track of things. He wasn't able to focus as well as he used to. He was distracted more. And he said, I think I need help in doing this. I want to continue to do some of this myself. But for the bulk of what I have here, I want to make sure that it's invested in a way that's going to be there for my wife. And his wife was several years younger than he was. And he said, my wife, as opposed to the way I am, she could care less about any investment whatsoever. She could care less. If I tell her I made so-and-so on a particular stock or lost so, she pays no attention to what. She's just not interested and never will be interested. So I want to make sure somebody is going to be interested for her. And so he said, he had listened to our radio show and seen several things that we had been a part of, so a couple of seminars and things like that. And he said, I want you to talk about this with me. Give me some ideas of what you can do to help me through this. And that began our relationship. And over the years, we took more and more of the investments that he had and started investing them in our portfolios just to make sure that they were consistent with the goals that he had for his wife and his wife had for herself. Because, she was in good health. She didn't have any issues at that point in time. she wanted to make sure somebody could help her as well. And so it had to be a communication between them to start with. Honey, I'm doing this. We're going to go see Mr. Anderson, and we're going to go through this process, even though I know you don't want to. We want to go through the process so you understand what it is that we're doing now.
We're talking about financial stories, real life stories that apply to our financial lives, especially as we plan for retirement. I'm Kevin Tharp, elder law and estate planning attorney, and I'm talking with Gary Anderson, our co-host here on Truth and Planning. And Gary, it sounds like that technology is a wonderful thing because it lets us keep up on things like our current investments more than we probably ever have been able to do. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, because technology develops so fast, it's hard to keep up with it, as your older client suggested.
Yeah, and we became good friends over the years because he was such an interesting person and had so much to contribute. So I really felt blessed that he had ever even come to see me, because it wasn't just about the work that I did and the work we did together, but just the things he could tell me about people and experiences and everything else. Told me stories about different things that had happened to him. So that became a good relationship, but you're right. This is something that technology is good and it's bad. You have so much technology at your fingertips. You can make so many quick decisions, and some of those decisions are irreversible. You can't really change things once you push a button at times. So all of a sudden, you've made this decision, and this is what he ran into, is that he realized, that was the wrong decision. I didn't want to sell that. I wanted to sell this, or I wanted to make sure I put a stop on this. He was really, into the markets as well, and knew how to really buy and sell and do other things, run options and things like that.
And the fact that he involved his wife, I like that part of that, because a lot of people, in marriage relationships, the husband does certain things and the wife does certain
Mm-hmm.
things. And sometimes there's not a tremendous amount of communication. I know there's a tremendous amount of stuff that Missy does at our house that I really would have to ask her twice to really figure out what it is that's going on. But I think it's good that he involved his spouse in there, because these decisions are going to impact her in the long run.
Well, and he knew that. And like all of us, we love our spouses. And we do want to make sure that they can be taken care of after we're gone. And I say taken care of in a sense that they can continue to do the things that they're interested in. This lifestyle we talk about all the time, these things that people want to do in their lives. And he had grandchildren, he had children, great-grandchildren even. Her real emphasis was making sure she was there with them a lot. And so by doing what we did, it allowed her not to have to think about those things. And it was a good thing, because sure enough, about a year and a half ago, he died. And fortunately, and this surprised me, because I didn't really think he had a lot of physical issues, but he did have a physical issue, and it's what got him eventually. And he died, and he left her in a good situation there, just because he had taken that extra step to make sure it wasn't just him that knew all this. All these secrets that he was not going to take with him, he wanted to make sure somebody else knew those secrets as well and knew what was going on with their financial plan.
Just like this gentleman, Gary, reached out and took the first step and reached out and contacted you. How can our listeners take that first step with you?
Kevin, they can reach us at Anderson Advisors. We're in downtown Gainesville, 405 Broad Street, Southeast. Our number is 888-371-2847. You can also go to our website, gary-anderson.com. Kevin, this is an important step that people can take. We don't charge for this. It's something that we enjoy doing, having that conversation. I always encourage people to make sure that both of you show up. Bring your spouse, because there's a lot to be learned. There's a lot I can learn listening just to the two of you talking. So this is what we like to do.